Virginians have a new governor-elect. ABC News has projected Republican Glenn Youngkin as the winner, beating former Governor Terry McAuliffe. It's a stunning defeat for Democrats, by the way, in a state that President Biden won by 10 points just a year ago. Meanwhile, the New Jersey governor's race still too close to call. ABC News Political Director Rick Klein joins me now for more on these elections and what all the results mean as we look forward to the midterm. I tell you what, we were paying so close attention, Rick, because we live in Virginia, so we were up pretty late. So let's talk about just what, first of all, what this means with Youngkin, this Youngkin win and a Republican majority in the House of Delegates, and what it means for Virginia now.
Yeah, Kira, think about what your neighbors were doing here. This is a major statement in a state that President Biden carried by 10 points, in a state where no Republican has won in a dozen years. To have a political newcomer come in, run against a former governor, and win relatively easily. The issue set that carried him is so striking because he talked about the economy, he talked about jobs, he talked about schools and what kind of curriculum your students should have. He tapped into the frustration that's felt around the state and arguably around the country, Kira, around this COVID recovery period, as well as the Biden agenda that's been stalled in Washington. And he was able to channel all of that into an electoral force, which meant that the suburbs that went for Joe Biden by about 6 or 7 points, they flipped almost exactly in his direction. Glenn Youngkin carried those same places, these areas right around here in Washington, as well as down outside of Richmond. Across the state, you saw just enough of a shift among voters to power a Republican to victory in a place where most people thought it just wouldn't be possible.
Yeah, and in my community, a lot of parents, and this race really galvanized parents, and it really came down to education for everybody, and COVID, and the death of George Floyd, and critical race theory, and it was all about education and fears within the curriculum. So McAuliffe was ahead in the polls by nearly 8 points in August. What do you think was the critical moment that was a turning point in this race? Do you think it came down to their conversations about education, or was it something else?
Yeah, I think the singular moment in this campaign, the moment that we're going to remember as long as people are studying elections, is when Terry McAuliffe said that he didn't think that parents should be able to tell schools what to teach. Now, the comment in the context of the moment made more sense. It was about particular advisories that would go about books that would be taught in schools. But the bottom line is it encapsulated an argument that the Youngkin campaign and many Republicans nationwide have been trying to make about government control, about whether and who should be making decisions for your children. That line became famous almost overnight. It was cut into a campaign ad that us here in the Washington area saw way too many times. It forced Terry McAuliffe on the defensive, and it rocketed education up to the top of the issue set. And a very rare thing in elections, Kira, usually when education is a top issue, that's an advantage to Democrats. They're very close to labor unions. They tend to support more funding for public education. The opposite happened here. The more you cared about education, the more likely you were to vote for Glenn Youngkin.
Yeah, and so it didn't work for parents. They're going to have to go over the labor union vote now. So the election, does it give Republicans a roadmap to taking back the House and Senate next year?
There's no question they are going to be looking at how Glenn Youngkin did this. He threaded the needle that so many Republicans have failed to even identify in the haystack of choices. And that is to say you're close enough to the Trump base that you've got them on your side. You certainly have Trump firing out against you with angry statements. But you're also acceptable to a broad number of independents who basically gave up on Trump and may not be gettable again by him. Glenn Youngkin was essentially a permission slip for independents and some Republicans who soured on the party under President Trump to come back into that fold, to find another home and a new type of candidate, forward-looking, different kind of issues that he talks about, but at the same time talking to some of the dog whistles and some of the favorite slogans that populate a lot of conservative talk on cable news as well as on President Trump's statements. So he was able to find that spot. Now, it's not clear how many other people are as good at or as wealthy as he is to self-fund that message, but there's a lot of Republicans that will be looking to this and say, look, there's a way to be a Republican these days who's neither full-on MAGA nor never Trump, and that might be the sweet spot.
I don't need to tell you this, you're the historian here, but the last 8 presidents, going back to 1977, have seen their party lose the Virginia governor's race in their first year in office. And so it sounds like Democrats should be panicking.
No question. And one other thing that's instructive in that history is that it doesn't necessarily tell you what's going to happen in the midterms. So there might be little that a president can do about it anyway. But look, if this was the opposite result, Democrats won big in both New Jersey and Virginia, Biden would be triumphant today. He'd be exactly on the same course. This was a wake-up call. Now, what did Democrats do with it? How do they recast it? They're already deriving almost opposite reactions from this. Some think that the mistake was to not do more and do it more quickly. Others think that they should slow down, take their foot off the gas, explain to the American people what they're trying to do. There were long-running arguments in the Democratic Party that were not solved by the stinging defeats that marked yesterday's races.
So I've got to ask you about, obviously, another measure that we have been following, and that is in Minneapolis. And it was to replace the police department, and it failed. What does that mean for the progressive police reform movement, and why do you think it failed?
Yeah, Kira, it's so interesting because this was the city of George Floyd. Defund the police was the popular slogan, and what it morphed into was a ballot initiative that would take the police department away, put it under a new Department of Public Safety. It didn't necessarily mean, quote unquote, defund the police, but that was an outgrowth of that movement. What this says, though, and voters rejecting this, among other things, they're worried about crime, which has been rising in the last year plus, and it tells you how hard it is to turn a slogan into actual action. This was the best attempt that advocates had to try to recast what it meant to oversee policing in a city where, like Minneapolis, that has gotten so many headlines for bad actions by police officers. Even there, they weren't able to find something, and it was striking to me also how many mainstream Democrats, prominent Democrats nationally in Minnesota, were against this, even though their party was broadly for major police reform. A lot easier said than done.
ABC News Political Director Rick Klein. We had some good stuff to talk about today. Thanks, Rick.
As always, thank you, Kara.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.